This is the SAM Student Handout, and it is something that you should keep next to you as you work on essays because it has all of the formatting instructions that you need. It's also good to have next to you as you do your revisions so that you can make sure that you have not missed any of the details of MLA format rules. You don't want to miss any points just for forgetting to do things like making sure the font is 12-point Times New Roman, double spacing, make sure your margins are all 1 inch. On the Works Cited page, that means your first line of each source is going to be just 1 inch from the margin. Some of you are having too little space between the margin and the first line, and some are having too much space. So make sure that you pay attention to those details, and you can certainly pause the video and read those details for general formatting guidelines. My suggestion is that you actually print this handout and just keep it with you as you work on your assignments. The first page formatting is important. You want to make sure that you have proper capitalization of your titles. Do not underline your titles. Do not put them in italics. Do not use quotation marks or bold for your own titles at all. So make sure that you're following those rules, and every major word of a title must be capitalized. So this is not only important for your general formatting guidelines for each assignment you do for English class, but also for the final exam in English 101. So you will have questions that have you identify which title is the correct format, which title is not correctly formatted for the title of your essay. Now you'll remember that titles of longer works, of published works, like A Midsummer Night's Dream, that's a play, so that is italicized even within your own title. But look, if you use a title of something in your title of your own, the title of your essay, then only italicize that part that is the published work. The rest of your title is not italicized. Okay, so your own part of the title, your own words are just in standard font, 12-point Times New Roman, just like the rest. Another important thing that you need to remember is not to put any extra space between your heading and the title of the essay, and then no extra space between the title of the essay and the beginning of the essay itself. So a lot of people want to make the title stand out or want to, use more space on the page for some reason, and they just think it looks better maybe to give some space between the title and everything else, and that is not correct for MLA format. So pay really close attention there. Also pay attention to the order of the heading. You'll be asked this on your final exam in English 101 as well. Make sure that you have your name, your instructor's name, your course number, the date, the assignment name if required. I don't generally require that, but I don't count off if you do include that. So certainly you are welcome to include that part. The 4 basic parts or main parts for MLA format headings that you will encounter no matter what college you go to are your name, your instructor's name, your course number, and the date. That's standard MLA format. And then any additional things that your instructor requires, you should pay attention to. All right, so another useful part of the SAM Student Handout that you need to be aware of and using as you create each assignment is the section that explains the formatting for your works cited pages and your in-text citations. So you have different types of works cited entries done for you here. So you can see how to format each type of source you might be using. So just make sure that you are paying attention to that. You don't always have to just use what I offer as a sample. You can look these things up yourself. Also, don't rely completely on citation generators. They're fine to use to an extent, but then you need to go back and check your citations against what you know you need to do for your formatting based on the SAM Student Handout. So for example, a scholarly journal would have last name, comma, first name of the author, period, title of the article in quotation marks, name of the journal in italics, the volume number, and then the number of the issue and the date of publication, and then what pages you found that article on. And there is a difference if you have found that article online, of course. So much of the beginning is going to be the same. You will probably have a publisher or sponsor that will appear at the bottom generally of an online article. The publication date, that's the same, but instead of page numbers, you'll have the URL. So pay attention to those things. Small details count. So notice the details, check them against what you see as required in the SAM Student Handout. Another important thing that you're going to want to use the SAM Student Handout for is for in-text citations. So you have to look down a little ways before you see your in-text citations. Quoting sources is the header or the heading of the in-text citations section. So you can see how to integrate a source in your own writing, in your own sentences. So here is a lead-in that uses a student writer's own words right before a little section of text that is quoted. And then notice at the end of the quotation there's no period. The period goes after the parenthetical citation that contains the author's last name and the page number of the quotation. Notice there is no comma between the author's last name and the page number. Also notice that after the word that, you never use a comma after the word that. The word that and the comma do the same job, so you don't want to use a comma after the word that. Eventually, you may need to cite a poem, include lines of a poem, or even song lyrics in your work. So notice how you quote short lines of a poem. And this sample here has the lines of the poem that are going to be quoted introduced with an independent clause. And an independent clause is something that could stand alone as a complete sentence. But we never want to start a quotation or a sentence with quotation marks. We always want to introduce it in some way. So, if we were to end this independent clause with a period, that part of the sentence would still be grammatically correct, but we would be starting with quotation marks and ending with quotation marks, which would be a dropped quotation. It would not be integrated into our own words. So, to make sure we're integrating a quotation into our own words, we can use an independent clause or complete sentence, but we need to join it to the quotation by using the colon. Remember, a colon says, and here it is. So, the difficulty of his choice, and here it is. And then the poem describes that difficulty using the exact words that illustrate that point. Notice that for lines of poems, for every time the line of the poem would go to the next line in the original source, when we're quoting 3 or fewer lines, we want to use a forward slash between the lines of the poem. And then at the end, we don't put a period or a comma, just a period after the parenthetical citation. Still use the author's last name, but since we don't have page numbers, We actually will cite the line numbers and use the word lines there. So lines 3 through 5 are what's being quoted here. So you also will eventually possibly quote longer works or longer quotations, not longer works, but longer quotations from any size work. It could be a short work or a long work. And for that, you'll need to use a block quotation format. Generally, a block quotation is introduced with a full sentence, ending with a colon, just like I described earlier, and that connects our words to the words that we're about to quote. And when you are quoting more than 3 lines of a poem, so 4 or more lines, or more than 4 lines of prose, and prose is anything that is not poetry, so any kind of writing at all, an article, a novel, it doesn't matter if it's fiction or nonfiction. Prose is anything that is not poetry, so anything that doesn't have distinct line breaks in the original form. But to quote lines of a poem in block format, you actually make the line breaks as they appear in the original. Introduce the quotation with an independent clause followed by a colon, and you'll notice there are no quotation marks. So the way to create the blocked quotation is to indent a full inch from the left side of your text in your essay. Notice it's still double spaced, so don't suddenly go to single spacing. Some of the computer software programs will automatically make a block quotation single spaced, so make sure you leave it double spaced for MLA format purposes. In addition to not having quotation marks, you actually do get to end your quotation with the period that belongs in the original, or if it doesn't have anything in the original, don't add anything, but whatever punctuation ends the end of your quotation, go ahead and leave it there, and then put the parenthetical citation. Notice after the parenthetical citation, there is no punctuation. So it's a really strange rule. You can blame MLA format. I did not come up with this rule, but it's the way it's always been, and I'm sure there's a good reason. I have not discovered that reason yet. So no quotation marks when you are block quoting more than 4 lines of prose or more than 3 lines of poetry. And make sure that you put the end punctuation, in this case, with no quotation marks, you put the end punctuation with the original text, and then not after the parenthetical citation. So it's a little strange. And then, of course, for the rest of your SAM Student Handout, you have wonderful examples of how to use signal phrases, how to, if you need some ideas of signal phrases before quotations, you have those. Read the important rules and reminders. Read all the details. You have a lot of good information. And here's an important section of the SAM Student Handout, a checklist for writing the essay. So this might be extra useful when you are at the editing stage, ready to turn in your final revision. Just do one extra little check, especially when you are moving on to a higher level English class. I would hang on to this SAM Student Handout and continue to use it. In upper level classes of English, you're going to write about literature a lot, so make sure that you are using present tense verbs when you write about literature. Those are important things. Also, in your final exam for English 101, you're going to be asked what verb tense should you use when writing about literature? The answer is going to be present tense. Also, for most academic writing, you should use only third-person pronouns. Avoid first person and avoid second person, unless you are given explicit permission by the instructor to use a different perspective or pronoun. All right, that is the SAM Student Handout. Use it for every essay. Check your work.